All right, thank you all for coming tonight. We are here for the preparedness or pandemic preparedness with our world-renowned Dr. Thomas Fletcher. He's going to give I don't even know what he's going to talk about tonight, but I think it'll be great. And I'll turn it over to him right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Korn. Pandemic preparedness. So let me start by saying that the setup for this evening's conversation is false. No ill sentiment directed towards you for being here or towards Commissioner Korn for setting this up. But to be quite honest with you, the very notion of a pandemic preparedness is a con game. Before this evening's out, I'll try to convince you of that. It's a psyop. It's a cognitive trap. And we're going to have, I'll spend half the evening giving you pearls of information that will make you feel comfortable about going forward in the future and trying to keep yourself healthy. But the other half of the conversation will be reinforcing this idea that the very concept of a pandemic is fake. And they want you to be afraid. And so perhaps your best strategy is to not be afraid. I mean, Franklin Delano Roosevelt told us, the fear is, the worst thing to fear is fear itself. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Anyway, I'm going to break my comments up into roughly three categories. Pharmacological, so we're going to talk drugs. So take your pencil out and I'll give you all the little pearls that I have. No, you really don't. They're not going to be that important. Physical conditions or things you can do to prepare yourself. For the first half, I'm going to pretend that there is such a thing as a pandemic. We're going to play pretend. We're going to play their game, and I'm going to tell you how to prepare for this pretend game. And then thirdly will be the mental preparedness, okay? So pharmacological, physical, and mental. So let's start with the pharmacological. In that realm, broadly speaking, let's break things up into, if you will, allopathic medicine, ordinary traditional medicine, the stuff that I studied and practiced for 42 years. And then, if you will, herbology or alternative medicine, whatnot. Now, I don't know anything about herbs, so I'm going to tell you that right up front. However, there's a great deal of information to be harvested from the internet. You can actually teach yourself a lot about herbs. So if we're going to imagine that we have some virus that is going to kill you, are there herbs that have antiviral properties? Well, it is said, and how good the literature is on this, I don't know, because a lot of these herbs have never really been studied in a rigorous sense. But it is said things like hibiscus, black currants, pomegranate, there's a oca root. I mean, if you go to the internet, and my personal favorite, by the way, AI search engine is Alter AI, not Grok or whatever, but Alter AI. I think it's pretty. It holds up to my version of reality testing. It tells the truth as opposed to ChatGPT and some of the others. So there are, in fact, potentially legitimate herbs out there that have antiviral and anti-inflammatory properties. You can research those, and certainly if we have a pandemic, then my advice would be to resource these pharmacological agents, alternative agents. Now, if you're going to stay in the realm of the kind of medicine I used to practice, then it would come down to the following. When you get a bad viral infection, and I'm going to stick with viruses here for a moment, and then I'll switch over to bacteria. But if you're going to get a bad viral infection, the virus doesn't kill you, except maybe rarely. What kills you are secondary consequences of the viral infection. So people didn't really die of COVID. They died because they went into sepsis, or they died because they developed a secondary bacteriological pneumonia. Okay? So the virus per se, a whole lot of people died in an ICU from COVID, and you couldn't culture COVID from their bodies. The body had already eliminated the virus. Would they die of? Well, you may have heard the term cytokine storm. Maybe that was a term. Well, what you die of, again, is you go into shock. In other words, your immune system is assaulted. It gets out of whack. A cascade of events takes place, and ultimately you go into something that's called shock. And when you go into shock, a number of things happen. Your blood pressure drops out. Your body literally becomes leaky. You leak through the pores of your body. You get edematous. And most importantly, your lungs swell up with fluid. And if your lungs swell up with fluid, you can't breathe. So a lot of people who get a viral infection end up dying of respiratory arrest or respiratory failure. They drown because they've gone into shock and their lungs fill up with fluid. So what do you do about that? So again, I'm not talking antiviral here. What I'm talking about is what do you do to control the immune system that's run amok? Well, again, in my arena, that is to say old-fashioned allopathic medicine, steroids. So depo-metrol, prednisone, and you can either take the steroids orally if it's true full-on shock, or if you're having just pulmonary problems. You've got secretions, this terrible cough with a lot of production, then you're going to want a nebulized steroid, one that you breathe in. Asthmatics frequently will use aerosolized steroids to control the abundant inflammation that's going on in their lungs and their airways. So beclomethasone, aerosolized. By the way, you don't have to remember any of these things. If you go to Scott Porter at Superdrugs, he can fix you up with any of this. The other way in which a secondary effect of a viral infection that would kill you is you get a secondary bacteriological infection. So in other words, the virus that got you, the flu, okay, the bird flu, swine flu, COVID, whatever, it sort of compromises your system. Then a colony of bacteria, not the virus, the bacteria, settle in your lungs. You then get an infection from that. Now you have pus in your lungs. Now you can die of the bacteriological infection. Now for that, you want an antibiotic. So if you're going to have in your cupboard drugs that are going to get you prepared for the pandemic, you're going to want some steroids to ward off sepsis, and you're going to want broad spectrum antibiotic. So putting that like a Z-Pack, azithromycin is a broad spectrum antibiotic. That one became popular with various protocols with COVID. You would get, you'd see the frontline doctors and they would have you take, ivermectin and this and that. And in that list of things to treat, the COVID pneumonia or the COVID infection would be azithromycin, a Z-Pack. All right. So if you're going to have your little doc kit and you're going to have things in there to get you prepared, well, then have a Z-Pack or some other common, effective, broad spectrum antibiotic. Here again, Scott Porter, I keep saying Scott, he's a friend of mine, and he's good and he's knowledgeable. And you could, I don't mean, you could go to Medicine Man or any pharmacy you want. I don't actually care, but I happen to know him. In any event, but you see where I'm going. So the virus itself doesn't kill you. What kills you are the secondary effects. And let me give you an example of that. The famous Spanish flu of 1918, the one that was said to have killed 50 million people. Now, you know what they died of? Now, a whole bunch of them died of secondary bacteriological pneumonia. And this was in an era before we had antibiotics. So when they got a pneumonia, they just were unlucky. But the other reason so many people died of the Spanish flu in 1918 is there was a little known company called Bayer, a German company that had invented an unbelievable product called aspirin. And aspirin had these amazing properties, pharmacological properties. It could take away pain. It could, it was an antipyretic. It would take away a fever. So you could take your aspirin and you wouldn't hurt so much and you wouldn't have a high fever. And so it was believed that this was a positive thing to treat the Spanish flu. And so a whole bunch of people were given aspirin. Now remember, aspirin had only been discovered a couple of years before the Spanish flu. And so it was not understood all of the, if you will, pharmacological effects of aspirin, nor was it understood the dosing of aspirin. So in a modern sense, you take a few grams of aspirin, grains, not grams, grains, which is some fraction of a gram. But back in the day, in 1918, you would have been given 50 to 100 milligrams of aspirin per dose several times a day. Well, that ends up being 10 times a modern dose for aspirin, 10 times. Now, what's the other thing that we know is a consequence of aspirin? It causes you to bleed. Exactly, it paralyzes your platelets. In fact, if you've had, in fact, some people argue if you're 65 years of age, an argument can be made that you ought to take a baby aspirin a day just to kind of thin your blood out. It's just kind of good for you. It calms your bloodstream from clotting so much. And if you happen to have some hardening of the arteries, you want to keep from clotting them off. So take a baby aspirin. I'm not even sure that's a bad idea. I don't do it, but I wouldn't not advise it. I mean, certainly if I had had a heart attack or a stroke or had some TIAs, you know, those little mini strokes, I would probably be wise to go on a baby aspirin to thin out your blood. But if you're a 20-year-old and you get the Spanish flu and you're given a dose of aspirin 10 times greater than what we would take, and mind you, a baby aspirin would be the difference of 100 times. 100 times. And guess what these people died of? Pulmonary hemorrhage. They had this inflammation in their lungs. Sure enough, they had a viral pneumonia. They didn't die of Spanish flu. They bled into their lungs and they drowned in their own blood. That's what most people died of in the Spanish pandemic of 1918, pulmonary hemorrhage. So I'm using this as an example to illustrate that it isn't the virus that kills you, it is a secondary effect. Any questions about what I've said? And I think the example of the Spanish flu is very telling. That sometimes our interventions cause more trouble than if you just left the poor bloke alone. You see what I'm saying? Or if you're going to do something, have some hibiscus tea. You see where I'm going? I mean, there was a reason I started out with these herbal things, or pomegranate extract or whatever. Look, I'm not trying to be an advocate for pomegranate extracts, but it's not going to be like taking mega doses of some pharmacological agent like remdesivir, which will knock out your kidneys and you die. And that was the protocol to treat the COVID pneumonia. I mean, it was lethal. It was a lethal protocol. All right. Okay, sticking now, last topic on pharmacological. Remember, I had 3 categories: pharmacological, physical, mental. The last topic on the pharmacological. Okay, so this comment is predicated on what I believe is a pretty reasonable, hardy model of health and disease, which 5 years ago I didn't have any idea of, and the and COVID caused me to go back and get another medical education. And here it is. One can localize a lot of disease to how well your mitochondria are functioning. Now, what in the hell are mitochondria? Well, it turns out they're the utility plants of our cells. And as it turns out, that if you have adequate energy stores in the cells of your body, then you're going to be healthy. And if you have inadequate energy stores in your body, then you're not going to be so healthy. And it turns out that a whole host of diseases are downstream of the mitochondria not working so well. So what do you do to keep the mitochondria working? And what do you do if, for instance, you do get a bad viral infection, and that will trigger some irregularity, some decrease or degradation of the mitochondrial function? What do you do to restore function in the mitochondria? Well, this is where the story of antioxidants comes in. So, elderberries, tinctures is an antioxidant. And this thing and that thing are antioxidants. And you read about antioxidants. Well, there is something to be said about antioxidants. And indeed, that is of paramount importance. So I'm going to give you the two, shall we say, most potent antioxidants out there. That's not to say they're the only ones. You can find people who make tinctures of this or that, and you come up with all kinds of cocktails for antioxidants. But the two that I know of that are pretty darn important are going to be glutathione and vitamin C. Okay? So glutathione is just a fancy word for a molecule that we actually make. Our livers make glutathione. And you can get glutathione supplements, but the bioavailability of the glutathione is poor. So you can take gobs of it, and you won't really absorb much of it and get it where it needs to go. Now, you could get an IV. You could get an IV glutathione drip, but then you have to get an IV, and that's a lot of trouble. It turns out there's a precursor molecule to glutathione, which is called N-acetylcysteine, NAC. You may have heard of it. And NAC is a precursor molecule to glutathione, and that molecule is readily absorbed in the GI tract. So if you take an oral dose, it's taken up and it's processed in the liver, and it will then facilitate your liver's generation of glutathione. And now that's going to be bioavailable. So if you really do get sick, okay, we're going to pretend that there's a pandemic. Remember, I said for purposes of this lecture, we're going to pretend that we're not wasting our time here. But before we're over, I'm going to convince you that we really are wasting our time. But in any event, if you want to believe that there is a genuine threat and you're going to die of this microbe, then stock up on glutathione, and the dosage, and the way to do that is with NAC, and the dosage is going to be, you're going to want a loading dose, and it's going to be basically a gram an hour for 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours. Basically, you're going to take 10 grams of the stuff. You're going to really load up. And then after that, you're going to divvy up the dose and take that gram 2 or 3 times a day, then for a maintenance dose of X number of days. Now, there are people who supplement, they take NAC supplements. I personally don't buy the supplement thing. If you eat a decent diet, you're probably getting everything you need, with one exception. Let me tell you my one exception. With winter months at the 48th parallel, take vitamin D. If you lived in Florida, you don't need it. But if you're at the 48th parallel, we have as much cloud cover as we have, and the sun is just on the horizon, then take vitamin D during standard time. Once you go back to summertime, where the clock sets back, and then you can wear a shirt and go out in the sun. You don't need vitamin D supplements. Just go get some sunlight. That's the only supplement that that Thomas Fletcher takes. So that would be vitamin D in the winter. Now, that being said, if I get really low sick, then I'll take NAC with the loading doses I've described. Ditto with NAC. Now, vitamin C is the other very powerful antioxidant. This is the one that Linus Pauling, the famous organic chemist of the mid-20th century, he was a big proponent of vitamin C. I thought he was a quack. Turns out he was a genius. And the reason that so much of the literature on vitamin C convinced the world that it was ridiculous is that the dosing was wrong. And even Linus Pauling told us way back 75 years ago, if you're going to do it, you have to really have high dose. So here again, you're going to want to take a gram an hour. Your urine is going to turn as yellow as a lemon. This is way too pale. Your urine is going to be bright yellow. Okay? You're going to want to take a gram an hour, again, up to 10 grams. And then after that, you're going to want to take a gram every few hours for days on end until you're over. So you have to flood the body with gobs of vitamin C. And the reason you need so much of the glutathione and so much of the vitamin C is that the problem with your mitochondria, when they stall out and they get to be dysfunctional, they're not working so well, you have an accumulation of, shall we say, chemical byproducts that are dangerous. And so the glutathione and the vitamin C mop up the dangerous chemicals that are causing the dysfunction of the mitochondria. Well, you might go through and clean up a population of these dangerous molecules, but your mitochondria will continue to make more of them. So you have to continue to the cleanup action. You have to continue to mop up the chemical pollutants within the mitochondria in order to overcome the dysfunction of the mitochondria so that your body, your cells can then have restored health. So that's why you need a huge dose. You need a huge dose to get to where it needs to be. That is inside the mitochondria, which is inside the cells. So bioavailability is critically important, and you have to have enough of it over a long enough period of time until finally your cells have restored their health. So all the studies that say vitamin C and glutathione is a bunk, is a con game, the studies that come to that conclusion have deliberately used inadequate levels. You didn't dose it high enough. And I invite you to do your own research here. In fact, I don't even want you to trust me. Do your own research. And then it's cheap, by the way. It's cheap and safe. Certainly better than remdesivir. And it's certainly better than getting intubated. And it's certainly better than a vaccine. You will not hear vaccine in this lecture. I can promise you that. Okay, so what kills you if you get one of these microbes? Well, not the microbe itself, not typically. It's a secondary effect. You either go into shock, you get a secondary bacteriological infection. What keeps you sick is your mitochondria are disrupted. Now you have to restore that with powerful antioxidants. And by the way, glutathione and vitamin C are not the only antioxidants. You have there are all kinds of antioxidants out there. I'm not poo-pooing other options. Use them all. Oh, does that make sense? I'm pretty much done with the pharmacological part of what I have to say. Is there anyone who has questions? Yes, ma'am.
So,
Yes, sir.
let me get a microphone.
Hi, Mr. Fletcher, Dr. Fletcher. Hello.
Yes, hello.
So when you say clean up the chemicals in the mitochondria, do you mean biochemical, or are you
Yes.
referring to some kind of synthetic chemical? Because you kind of switched the
Biochemicals, reactive oxygen species. I can get into more detail if you want. Okay, well, got one listed over here. I'll get into detail without getting into huge amount of detail. In 1937, the Nobel Prize of Medicine was given to Sigorgi, and he made a comment or an observation that all life is a flow of electrons. And in a very profound way, that is true. When you eat and you metabolize, you're taking pent up potential chemical energy in the carbohydrates and fats and whatnot of what you've consumed, and the mitochondria are going to burn those chemicals, glucose, sugar, or fatty acids. You're going to burn it. What does that mean? It means tearing apart all the hydrogen atoms off the carbons. You're going to tear it up. And the ultimate end product is going to be CO2 and water. Okay? All right. In the process of metabolizing all those biochemicals, you can generate species of chemicals, of biochemicals that are partially burned up. They're not totally burned up. It's like soot. So you have a wood stove, and the wood stove, you're burning your wood at a temperature where the burn is not complete, and then you develop all this black material that accumulates on the lining of the chimney, or accumulates on the inside of the box. Soot. Okay. Soot is what we're talking about inside the mitochondria. This is incompletely burned biomolecules, and when they accumulate, they booger up the flow of the electrons. And when you booger up the flow of the electrons, then you get a negative feedback loop. The more interrupting molecules that are around that booger up the burn causes more boogering up, and so it cascades on itself. So what you need is glutathione or vitamin C to mop up all the soot. So the biomolecules, the toxins that I'm talking about, indeed are endogenous. Your mitochondria is making them, and had your mitochondria been working appropriately, there would be no soot. All of the material would be totally metabolized. And the end product of a clean burn is water and CO2. But you can have a lot of other products that are not so clean. Just look at an exhaust of some vehicle that's not burning appropriately, and you'll see all that gunk. Did I answer your question? Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah.
So when you're talking vitamin C, are you talking ascorbic acid, or are you talking other types of vitamin C?
Well, you can have the reduced form. I don't think it matters. Your liver will reduce it. If the dude, so Scott Porter's fellow who sells his nutraceuticals, yeah, he will give you a whole lecture on the appropriate form of vitamin C. I have listened to his lecture. I'm not convinced. I get my vitamin C from Costco. But you can spend a lot of money with the right kind of vitamin C. I think what makes more sense is you get enough of it. Any other questions?
So, is it your opinion that cayenne is something that's worth having in the medicinal box?
Yeah, yes, and curcumin. Well, curcumin for sure. Cayenne is red pepper, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't cayenne red pepper?
We got
I don't
like
know.
some of it is like
Look,
90K.
I told you in the very beginning, I'm not a neurologist.
Oh,
But curcumin, though, or turmeric, and those are largely synonyms. I think they're different forms. Someone who knows, yeah, it's
The different parts of the plant. Yeah.
different parts of the plant. Thank you. I told you already, I'm not an herbologist, but turmeric and curcumin have, it's my understanding, valid, potent anti-inflammatory properties. And yes, there is a place for an anti-inflammatory. I would be more inclined to use curcumin or turmeric in the setting of a chronic inflammatory condition like rheumatoid arthritis or a dermatological condition or irritable bowel syndrome or some other pestering chronic inflammatory condition. When we talk about pandemic preparedness, I'm thinking you've been assaulted and you are low sick. You are sick as anything, in bed, high fever, you can't keep anything down, you feel awful, you have no energy. I would go the route of the vitamin C and the glutathione, or at some point the steroids. You now need high dose steroids. But curcumin is an important drug, but not particularly in this setting. Did I answer your question? Any other question? And I don't know anything about cayenne. I cook with it. I don't know. There's somebody who knows herbs. Is cayenne? What role does it?
It's a catalyst. It helps. It helps to increase the potential of what you take it with. It's a catalyst.
Well, there you have it. Oh, okay. And I trust you. I mean, that's fine. I just don't know. I'm not an herbalist again. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just think it's, I want to thank you for talking about the dosing. I worked in pharmacy for over 20 years. I never heard about the one every hour. I've taken the.
Oh, yeah, you gotta have a loading dose.
Yeah.
And Linus
Never heard of
Pauling
that.
said this. He said it 75 years ago. And some studies have been done using the loading dose and the high dose. Linus Pauling would say all the time, you gotta have 10 grams of this stuff. But the pharmaceutical world doesn't want you to know this. The NIH, whenever they set the studies up, they deliberately underdose it. That's why it has no effect. Because you have to flood the system. You have to flood the mitochondria, which are inside every cell of your body, with enough of it to actually soak up all of the soot, the reactive oxygen species, which is soot. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So would you still recommend taking vitamin C and NAC daily?
Yeah, well, I told you, I don't take supplements. There are people who believe in supplements.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering if the body would become over accustomed to it so that, I don't know, compared to high dosing when you're sick.
Well, that's a very interesting question you propose. In fact, on a philosophical level, I like your question. You understand what she said? If you sort of take these supplements, then your body gets used to the supplement, which means your body has developed a crutch. So if you supplement with glutathione, then what inspires your liver to make its own glutathione? You dumb down your liver. Actually, I think your question is brilliant. I like it. Maybe that's why I don't take supplements.
Yeah.
No, does everyone understand the philosophy of her question?
Yes.
I like it. I don't know if it's true, by the way. You got me to thinking, I don't know. But I have heard that. I'll tell you, there's one hormone for which I have heard that is true, and that's melatonin. So a lot of people take melatonin to sleep better, or I don't know, it has value. But then I have read that if you supplement with melatonin, then you will downregulate your body's ability to make melatonin. And actually, in the long run, that can be more deleterious. So I have heard your logic play out with that drug or that hormone in particular, whether that would also be true for glutathione or other things. Well, we know it's true. Here's another one, cortisol. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. So let's say you're a rheumatoid arthritis. You have rheumatoid arthritis. and your rheumatologist has you on chronic prednisone, which is a mineralocorticosteroid, okay? This plain old cortisol. Prednisone is a typical oral compound for that. And you've been on prednisone for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and your prescription runs out. And you forget to take your prednisone. You'll go into a crisis because your adrenal gland has lost its ability to make endogenous cortisol. You have atrophied. You can no longer make the hormone that is critical for life because you've been supplementing for years. So that is a definite example of what you're talking about. If I kept thinking about it, I'll give some other examples. I like your philosophy. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I might get off in trouble for being off topic, but you mentioned sleep. You don't have any just off the wall advice for problems sleeping. I have a family
do.
member that has chronic
No, I
sleep
do. And in
deprivation.
fact, I was gonna talk about sleep in the third portion of my talk. Because in fact, remember I said pharmacological, and then I said physical, and then I said mental, and a substantial component of mental is sleep. I'm gonna come to it, but I'll be happy to answer your question now, or you can wait until
I'll wait.
get to it.
Yeah.
Well, you can get diarrhea. Yeah, okay. So Tanya is correct. High dose vitamin C, but I'm not sure it will happen with just a loading dose in one day. Now, maybe you've experienced otherwise.
I've heard otherwise also.
Okay, so the point is, okay. Tanya makes a valid point. And it is this. You can get into trouble with too much vitamin C. It will cause you to have diarrhea. So actually, if you talk to that fellow who runs the nutraceutical department at Superdrugs, he will get into a lecture on how to dose vitamin C. You basically take it until you develop diarrhea, then you stop.
Well, I heard about diarrhea, your fever goes down. I don't know if that's true.
Okay, so if you get diarrhea, the fever goes down. Folks, experiment with it. But I can tell you this, it's a hell of a lot better than remdesivir or the vaccine. Okay? I'm sure you could OD on vitamin C. You can OD on water. You can OD on anything. Well, almost anything. But in any event, it would be hard to OD on vitamin C, but Tanya's point is relevant and you can get diarrhea. So thank you for that. Any other comments on pharmacology? By the way, I've only touched 1%. You folks are enlightened. The world is full of, home brews of one kind or another and remedies, and I'm not poo-pooing any of them. I've just sort of touched on the ones that I think should be discussed in a lecture on pandemic preparedness. This is my lecture, and so I get to choose the topic. But that's not to belittle all of the other home brews. You follow what I'm saying? I know people who swear by elderberry tincture. Okay, it's an antioxidant, and go for it. And it may not even give you diarrhea unless you take that much of it. All right. Well, black currants are a known potent antioxidant. So there's no reason that elderberries or other berries that are, pigmented, really highly pigmented, they've got phenols. I mean, that's kind of the spectrum of molecules that are in those brightly pigmented berries is where the special chemistry is coming from. So to say that elderberries are a potent antioxidant is fully plausible. I mean, I believe it. But it's just we have these trees around here. They're plentiful, so that's why. Do we have black currants around here? I don't know.
I do.
You do. Okay, well, make a tincture out of
I
it.
do.
Well, there you go. So,
And the juice is delicious.
okay, well, you see, at least not everything I'm saying is baloney.
Yeah.
Well, I've got one person who believes. Any other questions on pharmacology? Okay, now let's move into kind of the physical parameters. So, if we've got on the physical discussion, here again, I want to break it up into two components. One component is what do you do to prepare yourself? This is pandemic preparedness before the pandemic. And then what do you do if the pandemic is upon us? Okay, so let's talk about the preparedness before the pandemic. All right, so let's say you're going to go into battle of some kind. I don't know, you're going to go to Fallujah, or I don't know, Eastern Ukraine. I don't care where it is. You're going to go to some place on the planet where there are bullets flying and you could die. Now, how much training you have engaged in to prepare you for warfare, kinetic warfare, will have a significant bearing on whether you survive the experience. Can we all agree upon this? Training matters. You could put me in a football field and the results will be disappointing. For that matter, you could put me on a battlefield and the results would be equally disappointing. So training of the body matters a lot. So if you're going to prepare for a pandemic, again, we're going to pretend there is such a thing for purposes of this evening. But if you're going to prepare for it, what do you do to prepare for it? Well, what you do is you basically put your immune system through boot camp. So when we had the so-called COVID pandemic, the CDC told you to stay home. The CDC said, don't go to the gym, don't go outside, don't go to church, don't go to work. Well, all of that advice was just absolutely contrary. It was absurd. So what you do to prepare your immune system is to, in fact, expose your immune system to as broad a spectrum of germ bugs as you possibly can. So what are the common germ bugs that they talk about? Well, avian flu and swine flu. And then you've got a variety of the GI flus, you know, the rotavirus and Coxsackie virus and whatnot. Now, I would not personally go on a cruise ship just to go through boot camp of rotavirus and get diarrhea, but you could. It would be a version of boot camp for GI viral infections. So if you're into, you know, the hardcore training, boot camp, take a Princess Cruise Line to the Caribbean. But otherwise, remember, the bird flu is all over the place. So immerse yourself in birds and pigs. I'm dead serious. Birds are easy to have. If you've even got a half an acre of land, I highly suggest you have birds or have bird feeders or bird baths in the backyard and clean that bird bath. Come into contact with bird poop. Or make your own compost with bird poop. It's got a very high nitrogen content. So make your own compost. Mix bird poop with some straw and some other elements, and you have your compost pile. And after a year or so, work that compost material up with your fingers and let that material breathe it in. Folks, you're exposing yourself to endemic. Oh, you know what? We didn't define some critical terms. I'm going to take this opportunity right now. This evening's lecture is pandemic preparedness. What is a pandemic? What is an epidemic? And what is an endemic? Let's take this moment to talk about that. So, pandemic, according to the World Health Organization, is an infectious agent, new on the scene, that new, it's gotta be new, according to the World Health Organization, and Trump got us out of the World Health Organization day before yesterday. I don't know how that guy thinks, but sometimes he actually does the right thing, but anyway. So it's a new microbe. It's all over the world. It's not localized to one region or country. It's transmissible, highly transmissible, from human to human. If it goes from bird to bird, it doesn't matter. If it goes from bird to human and then human to human, then it becomes pandemic. Criteria 3 is that it's lethal. They don't say how lethal is lethal. They leave that undefined, which is going to be one of the secrets of why this entire lecture is a con game, is a psych op. And then number 4 is that you have verifiable causality. That is to say, the microbe in question indeed causes the problem that you believe it causes. And you have to establish that through valid means. And this, the PCR, is not a valid means. Which again, is why the pandemic is a con game. Again, we're going to come back to that. So those are your 4 criteria. That it's global, human to human transmission, it's transmissible, it's lethal, it's pathological, it hurts, it causes damage, kills people, makes them sick. And number 4, you can verify that the causative agent. All right. So let's go to the bird flu and working out the compost. That's why. Oh, by the way, what's endemic and what's epidemic? So epidemic, as opposed to pandemic, is it's regional. So you might have an outbreak of, well, you might have an outbreak of monkeypox in homosexual brothels. But that is not making it a pandemic where it spreads to the whole world. You see what I'm saying? It's localized to certain regions or certain social conditions. You follow what I'm saying? And then an endemic, and that's why I needed to define these terms, is in fact going to be a microbe that lives naturally within an animal reservoir of a given region, and that from time to time humans get it. So a classic example of an endemic would be malaria. There are areas of planet Earth where people will get malaria because that parasite is endemic to those geographical regions, which typically are jungles and they're tropical. You wouldn't have malaria up here. The parasite just doesn't live up here. So it's not going to be endemic. And never would, because it's just our climate is not conducive to the malarial organism. Which, by the way, is not a virus, nor is it a bacteria. It's a single-celled organism. It's a parasite. Okay, so that's the difference between pandemics, epidemics, and endemics. So avian flu is going to be an endemic. It is endemic to to birds wherever they go. So if you're going to work up the soil with compost, trust me, all that bird poop that you're playing with and is aerosolized and you're inhaling it is going to flood your immune system with exposure to endemic bird flu. That's boot camp. Folks, that's boot camp. Now you say, but now Thomas, how in the world is working up that compost going to help me when these damn scientists are playing with chimeric versions of the bird flu at that NIH lab, the poultry lab outside of Atlanta, doing gain of function research, and that's happening as we speak. Well, I'll tell you how it happens. Because when you have a family of viruses, the chemical properties of that virus are, some of the chemical properties are shared with a given flavor of the virus. So you have this version of bird flu or that version of bird flu. So the one they talked about last year was N5H1, but you could have had N6H3, you know, it changes. But now, just because you have a given flavor of bird flu, and that's why the flu is seasonal. You have, you know, last year's flu, and then you had 3 years ago the flu, and the transmissibility and some of the sort of epidemiologic properties of flu vary from season to season. But even though any given bird flu may have some subtle differences from other bird flus, they also share a lot in common. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we are going to characterize bird flu by the numbers from 1 to 100. So 64 is a feature of bird flu, a chemical feature of bird flu. And so is 58. Now, in a given year, there may be an accentuation of the chemical features that are all divisible by 5. So in other words, this season's bird flu are going to be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. I may be losing you. But if you've been exposed to umpteen generations of bird flu, statistically speaking, if you've gone through boot camp, you're messing with lots of bird flu, you will be exposed to those chemical elements that are divisible by 5. You will have been exposed to 35 to 60. And indeed, in March of 2020, an epidemiologist at Stanford by the name of John Iodonis canvassed the population of Santa Clara County in California in March. Remember, the COVID virus only broke out in Wuhan in December, made its way to the North American continent in the first week or so of January 2020. So 8 weeks later, he samples the population in Santa Clara County, and 30% of the population had already seroconverted. Now, had they seroconverted, or were they already seroconverted because COVID viruses of one kind or another have been with us forever? You follow what I'm saying? Why did people on the Diamond Princess, that cruise liner, why did, there's 3,000 old people on the Diamond Princess. They're stuck. They've got an outbreak of the COVID pandemic. How come you would have a husband and wife held up in the same room, breathing the same air, eating the same food, and one of them gets COVID and one of them doesn't? Because one of them had already seroconverted 12 years earlier because they came down with a flavor of the coronavirus, because that's one of the common cold viruses, that just happened to have had chemical properties that were divisible by 5. You see what I'm saying? That's boot camp. You want to immerse yourself in as broad a spectrum of avian flu virus as you possibly can. Prepare your immune system. Get it beefed up. Same thing with swine. Put some pig poo in your compost piles and work it up. Or do like I do and feed the pigs every morning and rub against them. You see that jacket over there? There's going to be some discoloration on the sleeves of that jacket.
Should we pass that around?
Yeah.
It's my prop. It's my prop. That, folks, is pig. Okay. So that's boot camp. So the CDC says isolate yourself, sequester yourself, don't expose yourself. Au contraire, do just the opposite. Just the opposite. And while we're talking about sort of physical, topics. So I said, we're now in the middle topic, the physical. So let's say that there is a pandemic. So what do? Isolate yourself? You want to expose yourself to whatever the doggone thing is, but you want to manage the dose. Manage the dose. And this can be done by a couple of measures. The first is nasal lavage. So go to church, go shopping, introduce yourself to people, stand within close distance, have them breathe in your face, have them, in other words, inoculate me, give me your goodies, give me your boot camp. You see what I'm saying? This is preparedness. Then, if it really is a pandemic and people really are dying, and you've convinced yourself of this, then go home and do nasal lavage. Why? Because in order to get truly infected, you have to reach a critical dose, an amount of inoculation in the nasal passages or the oral passages if it's rotavirus and it's a GI virus. Whatever the virus is, you've got to have a big enough dose of it to actually land and cause an infection. Because most of the time, the smaller dose of the virus you get gets stuck in the boogers of your nose and you never get sick. You've got to have a heavy enough dose. So what do? You go to church, you expose yourself to people, you come home and you do nasal lavage. And you could do a simple just saline wash or a big one that was advanced by the people on the frontline doctors, that were giving you the ways in which to prepare yourself for the COVID, was a dilute betadine iodine solution, a 10% solution. So go to the drugstore, buy betadine, that kind of yellow, orange material that you put on a wound of a horse or something. All right. Dilute it down. You don't want the straight thing. That would irritate the hell out of your nose, the mucosa. Dilute it down about 10%, no more. And then just irrigate your nose, gargle with it, don't swallow it. Do that a couple of times each side. That's it. Or if that's too much for you, then just saline, gargle saline, nasal lavage saline. That will naturally clean out the bulk of whatever inoculation of the virus that you may have encountered, and you're not going to get sick. But importantly, you have had exposure. It's just like working up that compost. Expose your immune system to the antigens, to the chemical properties of the so-called pandemic, microbe. You see what I'm saying? So that's boot camp. That's real life boot camp during the pandemic itself. And then the other physical measure you can take is adequate ventilation. So why do colds occur in the winter? Yeah, that's it. Poor ventilation. We close the windows. Just to show you how positively absurd the CDC is. So they insisted that you wear a mask on airplanes. Now, the ventilation system on commercial airplanes has a total volume replacement every hour by FAA standards. And not only is it replaced, there are filters like super duper filters that clean up the air of even very fine particles all the way down to 10 microns, much smaller than what a mask is going to trap. You follow what I'm saying? So the safest place you could be in America during the COVID pandemic was flying on an airplane because they had truly adequate ventilation. But the stupid FAA people said you got to wear a mask anyway. See how crazy people are? So adequate ventilation. If you're truly paranoid, then not only do you have adequate ventilation, go ahead and put the super duper filters on, and then have UV lights, have your air run through a UV light, which actually destroys the microbes. And frankly, schools, government buildings, grocery stores should all have installed UV lights at the entranceway of the building. And that would have taken care of all of the psychological trauma about going to a government building or whatever. It would have, but, and this is known, by the way, folks, this was known. I'm not making this up. This is well-established microbiology. In fact, aquariums. Have any of you ever owned an aquarium? Okay, well, it's one of the ways in when you're filtering your water, you run the water through a UV light to kill out the microbes. You know, the little algae and the whatevers is one way to keep the water of the aquarium free of an overgrowth of microbes. So UV light is known. It's not healthy in a big dose like that to small creatures. So adequate ventilation and then dilution, lavage of the nasal passages if it's aerosolized. Now, almost all of these so-called pandemic things are going to be aerosolized. Again, some of them are oral. You can eat them. Very rarely do you pick up a microbe just on the skin. You'd have to have a boo-boo in your skin. Now you're talking about cat scratch fever, or you're working with roses and you get pricked and there's a violation of the skin. So I'm not saying you can't get an infection through the skin, but when that occurs, you've done damage to the epithelium. You follow what I'm saying? I mean, you know this intuitively. I'm not telling you something that's not obvious. Okay, so boot camp. Put your immune system, expose it to the technical term is antigens. The technical term is antigens. When I say the chemicals of a given microbe or virus, the chemical, if you want to be sound smart, it has antigenic properties. So that N5H1 is the moniker, the little handy way of designating for the virologist what specific antigen we're talking about. In other words, is the antigen divisible by 5? To use that sort of numerical metaphor. You follow what I'm saying? Any questions about boot camp and preparedness and get yourself out there? Exposure. When COVID was around, I ran that little grocery store, wasn't a grocery store, it was a farmer's market, only local, the little log cabin in Cogallala. And I had a policy, you don't wear masks. There would be weirdos who would come in wearing a mask, and they would look at me not wearing a mask, and they would go, and I would go, no, please don't. And then they would be cautious about moving up close to me, and I would go, no, please, come close and breathe in my face. I did this every day. Michelle Gibb was one of my vendors. She's a great gal. She's and she had cows and would she had A2 milk, and she would sell yogurt and dairy products. And one Saturday we had she came and featured her dairy products, and she called me up the following Tuesday and said, Thomas, I'm so sorry, I have COVID. And you know, I had spent all that Saturday right next to Michelle. I'm using her name because I forgave her, and it doesn't matter because she's a good person and she wouldn't care. In any event, so she was very apologetic. I said, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for exposing me that whole day to COVID. I'm not even sure she had COVID. Remember, this is all a psyop, remember? We're going to come back to that before it's all over. But so did I care that I was exposed to people? Hell no, that was my boot camp. Every single day, I exposed myself to the public, and I enjoyed it. I encouraged it. And what would I do in the evening? I would go have nasal lavage. So just in case someone really did inoculate me with a big dose of it, I never got COVID. I never even got a viral syndrome. So there you have it. All right, so that's the boot camp and that's the physical. And if we do have one, the nasal lavage, ventilation, adequate ventilation, you might want adequate ventilation just in the wintertime anyway. So you've got your heater on, your stove, wood stove, just crack the window, get some ventilation going. Outside air is a wonderful thing. Put a jacket on if you're a little cold. At night when you go to sleep, crack that window, get some ventilation. It's when you're cooked up and you're rebreathing the same air is when you're gonna up the inoculum. That's when you're gonna get the counts to go up and then you do get sick. And so you're right. The reason colds are in the wintertime is because of poor ventilation. That's exactly correct. By the way, it's not always that easy. You know, back in the Spanish flu, government actually, what's the time? You want me to stop?
At 1900-ish,
What time is it?
so.
About 20 minutes.
Half hour.
Okay, the government actually tried to get people sick with Spanish flu. It's not so easy. They would do gross things. They would actually have people like living together. Some were sick and some weren't. And they try to get the ones not sick. And then they would share snot. I mean, they really did some nasty. You couldn't do this today, but in 1918 they did. Do you know 1% would get sick? That's funny. So in other words, it's not at all inevitable that just because you come in contact with someone who's got, you know, the dreaded disease, whatever the dreaded disease is, it's not so certain you're going to get it. Why? Well, how high is the dose? What's the relative humidity? What's the temperature? What's the the immunological preparedness of the population there? Have they already seroconverted? Would it be like all those people in Santa Clara County that already seroconverted long before there was a COVID pandemic? You follow what I'm saying? They all had, if you will, antigens divisible by 5. Anyway, the third category, the mental. And this is the most important, and I've already given you enough signals to tell you that a case can be made that the very concept of a pandemic is false. The very concept. Now let's analyze that. You're going to say, now look, Thomas, the Black Plague killed 50% of the people of Europe. I mean, that's not a joke. And indeed, a lot of people did die in the Black Plague. That's true. Or the Justinian Plague 400 years earlier. Or in the Polynesian or Peloponnesian Wars. Thucydides wrote about it. There was a plague of some kind, which it too was probably bubonic plague. Killed a whole bunch of people and actually altered the outcome of the war between Athens and Sparta. So I'm not saying there's no death that occurs because of microbes. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm going to say, though, is consider the following criteria for a pandemic. It has to be worldwide. Well, if you look at, say, the Black Plague of the 14th century in Europe, was it worldwide? No, it was actually in certain pockets in Italy and other nations of Europe. It had actually come from, by the way, this is interesting. The Yersinia pestis is the name of the organism that causes the bubonic plague. Curiously, Yersinia pestis is endemic to a region of China, and it lives in hamsters in this region of China, which is where Wuhan, the city of Wuhan is. It's one of those coincidences of history. So, the Yersinia pestis, the organism that gives you the Black Plague, comes from China and came to Europe via the Silk Roads, you know, Marco Polo and all that stuff. And the Justinian plague was in the Bosphorus Straits, where there was a lot of trade through the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. And then on the Adriatic coastline of Italy with the city-states, you have Venice and so on. You had trade. And so boats would come in with these rats that had the fleas, which in turn were infected with the microbe. So it's Chinese dolls, you know, it's the rat that contains the flea that contains the microbe. And indeed, people would get buboes, these ugly pustules in their glands, and they would die from it. But was it a pandemic? No. It would have been an epidemic. And indeed, a whole bunch of people in Venice may have died from the Black Plague. But 10 miles out from Venice, out in the countryside, nobody died. So now the transmissibility may be high, but it's a bit like a forest fire. The forest fire will destroy all the land until it runs out of fuel. And when it runs out of fuel, it extinguishes. So the Black Plague, the Yersinia pestis, may kill a whole population of people until it gets to the edge of where there are people, and then it has no more people to go to. Because there's a village 10 miles away. And it doesn't just jump 10 miles. So you have an epidemic, and it may even be a devastating epidemic, but it would be hard-pressed to say that it was a pandemic and it spread everywhere. No, it spread where you would then have, say, some trader who would have a cart containing material, potentially even some of the mice with the fleas, that would take, say, the bubonic plague, the Yersinia, from one of the city-states into the interior of Italy to cities in Tuscany or something. Now you have gone from point A to point B. What about all the other points? Did they all get the plague? No, they didn't. So the plague hit London, and Isaac Newton was smart enough to know that he had to get out of town. So he went back to the family estate out in the country. And there, Isaac Newton lived for a year and developed the mechanics of Newtonian mechanics, the mechanics of celestial motion and the properties of gravity in his time off, in his sabbatical. And then he went back to the city after the plague had dissipated. It had, basically, the fire had burned itself out. So Isaac Newton didn't die. So the criteria that a pandemic would took out all of Europe was not really technically true. It took out pockets of people. But in between the pockets of people where you had an epidemic, you didn't kill everybody else. Here's another trick. That is, how lethal is it? Now, the bubonic plague today is not lethal at all. It's a bacteria. If you get the plague, and people in Los Angeles and New York are getting the plague because we have such filthy streets, that the mice population, the rat population is on the rise, and now the rats have the fleas that have the Yersinia. So people are actually getting the plague in LA and New York, but they don't die because now, you know, tetracycline cures it. We have antibiotics. So you would never have you'd never have the Black Plague today from Yersinia because it's readily treatable. So how dangerous then is COVID? Well, there are 4.2 billion hominids on the planet. The best estimate, so the number of people who died of COVID is anywhere from 1.5 million up to 7 million. Depending upon how fraudulently you want to count the numbers. Tanya knows exactly what I'm talking about. Well, actually, given all of the laughing, I think the entire audience knows the sarcasm here. Okay, so even if we want to believe the bigger number, that is still going to be one human being per 10,000 Homo sapiens. That means all of Bonner County would have between 4 and 5 people die. Okay, how many people die on US 95 in a year? I mean, people die. So at what point do we want to call a pandemic this thing that we're going to lose sleep over? We're going to get to talking about sleep. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's fear pornography. They want you to believe that the end is near. And and they prepare this. Remember those videos we had of Chinese people just dying on the streets? Remember all that stuff? It's all baloney. It was all fake. You remember that Dustin Hoffman film, Hot Zone or Red Zone? And people, they're caught in this office building and they're just dying. They're just dying. That's baloney. That doesn't exist. That's Hollywood. Bonner County would have had 4 people die, even if you want to believe their numbers, of COVID. Now you say, oh, but Thomas, I know people who died of COVID. Well, they died. They did die. And they may have even had a positive PCR. But did they die of COVID or with COVID? Because we know that the PCR had a very high false positive rate. We knew this. Remember the cycle thresholds? And in fact, there was a recent publication out of Germany, literally in the last 4 months. And this research group went back and looked at serology of Germans way back in 2021, 22, way back, early pandemic. And they now had blood samples, and they could now look at the serology. In other words, did these people have conversion with antibodies to COVID at the time when they were diagnosed as having COVID? In other words, positive PCR. Guess what? 87% false positives of the PCR. And this is with actual blood samples. And this was published about 4 months ago. So right there, 87% of the so-called COVID cases, definitive proof they never had COVID. Never had it. They were said to have it, but they didn't have it. So it was fake. So how many people died of COVID? And then, of course, we talked about how many people actually die of the viral infection and not secondary consequences. In other words, you go into sepsis, or you get secondary pneumonia, or you have hemorrhage. In fact, a lot of COVID, you had blood clots form and you would actually get a hemorrhagic pneumonia. But that's from, the spike protein causes an endotheliitis. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but the spike protein is a problem in and of itself. Very different than anything you would get from, say, flu. All right. And then, of course, the fourth criteria is causality. Well, we've already made reference to this. What else did people die of? In fact, I just said it. In other words, you have to prove that it was COVID that killed the people. So you have misattribution.
Death by doctor.
I'm sorry?
Death by doctor.
And death by doctor. Oh, iatrogenic. Oh, absolutely. Remdesivir, you know, the sarcastic word for remdesivir is
Why don't you disappear?
yeah, that's it. That's it. But I love talking to an informed group. This is great. I'm not telling any of you anything you don't already know. So let's talk about then fear, pornography, sleep, stress, and cortisol, and the immune system, because those all connect. Okay, so this is the mental preparedness. Okay? The overlords, whoever the hell they are, I don't know if it's central bankers, the devil, I don't know. The people that want to mess with you, I don't know. But whoever was calling the shots, engage in fear. And what does fear do? Fear elicits a stress response. What is the major hormone of a stress response? Cortisol. What does cortisol do? It downregulates your immune system. That's why if you have rheumatoid arthritis, your rheumatologist gives you cortisol to quiet your immune system so you don't burn up the joints in your body. So cortisol is a very powerful downregulator of the immune response. Well, if you're going to then have a pandemic, and you now have the wits scared out of you, you're going to be stressed out, you're going to have poor sleep, poor eating, and your cortisol levels will be sky high, and now you are weaker. Your immune system is intrinsically weaker. You are now more vulnerable to whatever it is going to hurt you. You see where I'm going? So the mental state of fear is exactly where they want you to be, so that you are in as immunologically compromised a state as you possibly can be. And I knew people that, and I'm just going to pick on Christians because I happen to be one, who don't fear death. And they might be 86 years old and have heart disease and on a couple of blood pressure medicines. And they would come into my shop and they would not be wearing a mask, and they would go, Thomas, I don't care if I die, I die. It's my time, I don't care. They didn't have fear. And one lady in particular who had lots of comorbidities, she did get COVID. She was sick for a couple of weeks, and she walked in one day and she looked great. She said, well, it wasn't fun, but I managed and it was okay. It was a bad flu, all right. I did not feel good. I would not volunteer to do this again, but it didn't kill me. Why did it not kill her? I'm convinced it's because she was not afraid of dying. I don't know what it takes to be a warrior, or say, like one of these athletes who can perform in an unbelievable way, like Tom Brady or I don't know, you know the types. They must have an unbelievable capacity to focus and to train their brain, their mental state, into a higher level of performance. Now, I can't perform in any manner, but I can imagine that there are warriors out there who are survivors. You follow what I'm saying? Their mental state, they're fighters, or they perform at a high level. Well, if you want to be pandemic preparedness, then believe in God, meditate, get sleep, eat right, put your mind in the right place. Don't have elevated stress, don't have elevated cortisol. Be at peace, and don't let them get under your skin. The mental state is the name of the game. You follow what I'm saying? It may sound childish, but frankly, I believe this. I mean, now let's talk about sleep in particular. Okay, sleep hygiene. All right, 5 minutes on. Yes, 5 minutes on sleep hygiene, because actually sleep is a major component of the stress. You don't get the right kind of sleep, you're stressed out. You're not doing right. Your circadian rhythm, your daily rhythm of hormones and all, of which one of the major ones is cortisol. So you can get your cortisol all out of whack if you don't have the right kind of sleep. And if your cortisol gets out of whack, your immune system's out of whack. And if your immune system's out of whack, then you might be vulnerable to this fictitious pandemic. Sleep hygiene. Here we are. No light at night. None. Turn them all off. Particularly any blue light. No LED screens, no computers, none of that stuff in the bedroom. No lights in the bedroom, no noise in the bedroom, no electronic devices in the bedroom. If you can turn your router off, turn your router off. I happen to, for decades and decades, I believe that the whole EMR, low-dose EMR story was a crock of poo-poo. I now am thoroughly convinced it's real. And so these efforts to try to shut down the G5 towers, go for it. Go after these guys. Don't let them get away with it. I mean, it's coming. There's going to be a big fight. I think Verizon wants to put in a big one in downtown. Oh yeah, that's what the bee, the bee tells the truth. So shut off your router, and here's one to consider. Okay, so the big deal is made about intermittent fasting. Okay, now I'm a pseudo fan of intermittent fasting. I think it has value. I do not worship at the altar of fasting. But I think it can be useful if you play with it to tune your circadian rhythm. Circadian means daily rhythm. So when you eat, you go into certain physiologic state. And then after some period of time, the hormones in your body will now readjust to having just metabolized all that food. And then you have sort of low level ups and downs of your metabolism, thyroid, action, pancreas, and, glucagon and insulin reactions, cortisol, and other sort of hormonal tuning that takes place as a function of when you eat. So my recommendation is to play with a daily habit of intermittent fasting. Play with it. I'm not saying there's a recipe that works for everyone. I'll tell you what my recipe is, but it may not be everybody's recipe. It may be that you should eat within a period of time, say from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. It may be that you should eat between 12 p.m. and 8 p.m. It may be that you see what I'm saying. So play with this and then see what interval of time where you eat, such that when you finally put your head to the pillow, say at 10 p.m., that you're in a nadir, you're going to bottom out, and that you have sufficient stores of energy in your liver to see you through until 5 a.m. the next morning. Because if you deplete your glycogen stores prematurely, say at 3 a.m., the body then per force will generate cortisol to now make new glucose, which your body has to have. And that cortisol is a stress hormone, and it's going to wake you up at 3 a.m. So you're going to have terminal insomnia because your liver can't see you through to the end of the night. I've probably lost some of you, but play with when you eat and when you don't eat to fine tune your body so that you can land the plane and sleep for 7-8 hours. So no light, no sound, no electronics, no Wi-Fi, and then play with intermittent fasting on a daily basis, sort of listening to your body, playing with your body, and seeing what works to fine-tune the hormonal dials that control your circadian rhythm. Did I answer your question? Or do you have more questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure. My daughter is autistic and she gets OCD really bad. She won't right now for a long time now. She'll refuse to lay down. So she's sitting up.
Okay. So autism, okay, now that's an entirely different spectrum of issue. I'm talking about people who are in this room. You've left my arena of expertise. I am not I'll be happy to speak ad nauseum about autism, but I am not someone trained in how to manage autistic kids. I'm not trained in it. I don't want to pretend to be, and I feel for your urgency. It's not easy, and but I don't have magic. I don't have a way to deal with autism. Yes, ma'am.
FamilyHopeCenter.com. Check out their website. They've been doing incredible things for autistic kids for 4 years, and they're amazing. I know them personally. FamilyHopeCenter.com. FamilyHopeCenter.com. And you will never regret it. All right.
Well, thank you for that. FamilyHopeCenter.com. Panhandle Health needs to put that on our webpage. So send me a message and we will
Yeah.
make sure that that gets posted. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are resources out there. I just
Yeah,
didn't.
These,
I
these
don't-
people, I mean, I've been in alternative health for many years, and these people are the most incredible I've seen.
Does Weston Price Foundation have any advice there?
I don't know, but
They're in the same family.
pretty much, yeah, they go beyond on so many levels and they're amazing.
I mean, there are things you can do with diet.
Yeah, there's
All
they
kinds of
cover the
things.
full spectrum of.
I get it. I get it.
Many, many, many things.
just-
Diet is definitely one of them, but,
Right.
it's a very important one. That
Well,
there's a lot
thank
of
you
things.
for that information. Yes, sir. Or any other questions?
Well, I had a question. You were saying no noise also. I was wondering what you think about sound machines and
About what?
noise, you know, how you have the
Sound
background noise,
sound
the white
machine.
noise.
Oh, I love it. I have tinnitus.
So do I.
So I run these air filters, which has a frequency not dissimilar from my tinnitus. Cancels it out. I love it. I'm talking about rap music.
Okay, so if that is, that's why I usually can't sleep because my ears are ringing so much.
Yeah, white
So,
noise, absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, and experiment with it. Not all white noise is equal. So Darla got me some kind of a, I don't know, an app for the phone that, or even a little device that made noise like crashing waves and I don't know, other things. It irritated the hell out of me. It didn't help. So not all white noise is equal, I can
Yeah.
tell you. But the sound of an air filter was perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
Now that we're out of the WHO, will that have an effect on Panhandle Health? I was wondering how effective they were when we were part of WHO, and now that we're out of it. Any effect on Panhandle Health?
Maybe we could talk about that after the meeting.
You're smiling.
Not on that.
Oh, we're kind of here and we're recording also for pandemic preparedness. So if you have any personal questions for Dr. Fletcher, maybe we could ask those.
I do want to, thank you, Commissioner Korn, for saying what you did, and I will definitely respond to you, but I want to put in a plug for Commissioner Korn. Of your commissioners, he is the only one who shows up at our board meetings. So just FYI, he's the only one that shows up. Now, there may be other commissioners who make pronouncements about how invested they are in public health. And they may be, I can't be in their minds, but this gentleman actually shows up and he contributes. He speaks his mind. Believe me, he speaks his mind.
Yeah.
So, any other questions? Well, there we go. Then I guess we're done. Thank you, Commissioner Corn, for inviting me.